come out to one of our programs. Thanks for coming tonight. It's a great crowd. Dr. Bruce Mills is a professor of English at Kalamazoo College, and we're very excited to have him talk about his book, Siblings and Autism. So please.
Thanks for coming out. It's turning wintry very quickly today. Tonight is about storytelling, and I'm going to be reading stories more than talking about the book. So, and it's about the stories that are often overlooked in the autism experience. The stories centering on those who have the sibling experience. Just some thanks and acknowledgments to start out with. I'd like to thank Kevin for helping arrange this and get this going. I've never done this at the Kalamazoo Public Library before, and I've always looked forward to it. I'd like to thank Mary, my partner, for being here, Jacob, my son, who's not here at home, and Sarah, the sibling, who's here. The origin of the book really comes out of my thinking about what I could do for my daughter, because there are not, at least the time in which I began thinking about this, I didn't see a lot of books for young adults and adults who have a sibling with autism. And there often weren't balanced accounts. Accounts that get at some of the difficult things, accounts that get at the love that's shared between brother and sister. So this was really a way for me to give Sarah something I felt that she may not have gotten along the way. The story, another story in relationship to the book, though, was kind of interesting. I was at a conference in Cleveland, Ohio, that was bringing together people from English, psychology, neuroscience, a lot of people in relation, and who were interested in autism, and often had a personal interest in autism as well as a professional interest in autism. And I was going back to the hotel at the end of one long day, and there was a person sitting at the end of this, it's like, it seemed like a prom bus, there's lights flicking around the top and things like that. So, but I asked her, so what brings you to the conference? She said she had a brother with autism. And I said, well, where are you from? She said, well, I'm originally from Iowa. And I go, wow, I'm from Iowa. That's great. So where are you from in Iowa? She said, Storm Lake, Iowa. And I said, I'm from Storm Lake, Iowa. That's my hometown. And she described her brother. Her brother went to West Elementary School, where I went to school. And I remember as the school patrol captain, I was involved with getting people there to wave people across the street. And I remember quite vividly her brother standing on the corner waiting to be ushered across the street, and how we all knew he was different. But I had that vivid memory. And so there's something serendipitous about our meeting, and we both kept in touch and decided this would be a good book to do, a book that deals with autism and siblings. We wanted, again, to have a full range of stories that dealt with autism, siblings perspective, a balanced perspective. We wanted to try to get perspectives from different generations, as well from different backgrounds and cultural backgrounds. So I think there's more work to be done, maybe a second edition, but that's what you'll find in the book. So this evening is devoted to those stories. I'm going to be reading from my own work as well as from what's in the book. So an opportunity for me to bring my perspective on my daughter's experience into this. And I'm going to read the very end of the introduction to give you a sense of how we frame the stories. And then I'll begin with a short piece that I've written, move on to 3 selected pieces from the book, and then to end with an essay that I've written. And finally, for those of you who haven't noticed, the books are available in the back for $17, and $5 will be going to the autism side of Kalamazoo Valley Creek for sibling programming. Not much, but we want to, it's an important gesture. So this is from the introduction at the very end of our book, and this is written by both Deb and I. Personal stories can represent and help us understand complex human ties and tensions in a way that clinical studies cannot. For one thing, such writing can be the means of reaching beyond potentially stigmatizing clinical language by conveying lived experiences in vivid ways. The personal essay reveals that Though stories may share common plot lines, the individual voice has its own inflections and lyrical power. The essays in this book consistently demonstrate an ardent effort to connect, to understand our common humanity, and to find one's place among others. Reading and reflecting on well-told stories can illuminate how part of our problem lies in consistently thinking of ourselves in isolation from others. Our common work, then, is the toil of understanding, the labor of living with, and sharing our different ways of knowing in the world. To live together in the space, we need to hear and to honor the stories, all of them. This is my piece. It's called The Meltdown. It actually happened outside of this library. A number of summers ago, when Jacob was 9 and Sarah 10, we planned a Sunday afternoon adventure to the downtown library. Giving order to the unordered space of a weekend afternoon always seemed an adventure. Would we pack the right portfolio of Jacob's sketches, the Poos or Madelines or Big Birds? Would we remember the right number of colored pencils from Jacob's drawings and the just right shade of yellow-orange to color Ernie? Would the library have a copy of the video or book that Jacob had been requesting all morning? Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. And yet this particular afternoon in mid-June, quiet and brilliant blue, seemed the kind of adventure that left us smiling and acquiescing to Jacob's desires. This day he planned a photo shoot of the stuffed storybook characters perched atop the bookshelves in the children's section. The rabbit of Alice's Wonderland, Pooh, a dragon from a story I should know. And so we searched for the camera and made a special trip to Walgreens for film and planned enough time to drop off the pictures at Target's 1-hour photo. It would be a grand adventure. And through it all, Sarah laughed and held her brother's hand and entered his vision with all the joy that the hope of one calm day can instill. The library was not open. At first, Jacob just wept, letting his shoulders and back hunch forward, much like the crying poses of the animated characters he would draw. But quite suddenly he screamed, ran toward the sliding glass doors, and strengthened by his anger, tried to force them open. Sarah stepped forward to try to comfort Jacob, but I warned her back. As we looked on, he began to scratch his face and neck, leaving streaks of red beneath the tender lines of both jaws. For the next 10 minutes or so, we coaxed him foot by foot toward and into the van. Once in the back seat, however, he flung himself down and began to kick the windows. I yelled and reached back, grabbing at his shirt and arm, and then he went after Sarah. For a moment, she shrunk back, but then she started hitting him and crying and yelling, "I hate you, I hate you." Finally, we opened the door to let his fury back outside. On the sidewalk, Jacob kept lunging toward me, his hands intent upon scratching my face or arms. In the refuge of the van, Sarah called Mary on the cell phone, and in 10 minutes, 30 endless minutes from the start of his outburst, she pulled up and took Jacob home. His anger now subsiding, he began to sob. "Jacob was so sad," he said. "Jacob was so sad. Jacob was so sad." My daughter held her own kind of sorrow, and she holds it still. This sorrow has no ritual of completion, no baptism or anointing, no confirmation, no rows of chairs and cheering, no dawn or dusk in which to confess or bear witness. Who will know that in this 1 hour she held her brother's hand and felt her arms ache to comfort his desperate body, felt her voice tighten and curse, felt her fists against Jacob's chest and back, felt guilt and love and the yearning to begin anew. I want you to know what no one can know, that the wind caught Sarah's hair and held it off her face for just a moment as she sat next to me on the sidewalk, that she let her small fingers touch the blood on my forearms. I want you to imagine the many things that we leave unspoken, the memories that we must hold in faith because we do not as yet discern their meanings. And I want you to know that Sarah is still reaching out to me, and that we are still trying to understand the loss that Jacob instills in us, and the tenacious love that wounds with so much caring. The next piece is from the book, called Visiting Becky. These first two pieces may tear at our heart a bit. This one too. One of the patterns we found in the people who were submitting essays were describing the experience of their brother or sister being sent away, maybe being institutionalized, or being sent away to an educational place where the hope is that the brother or sister can do better and then come home. This is by Anne Clinard Barnhill, and she's also written a book, At Home in the Land of Oz, Autism, My Sister and Me, by Jessica Kingley Publishers, same book, publishers as this book. And this comes at the end of this story, this essay, where she's gone to visit her sister, and they're getting ready to leave. The weekend passed quickly. Soon the time came to say our goodbyes. I would learn that the time always came. Dad swung into the lot in front of Becky's building and parked in the visitor slot. Seeing the word visitor printed in the white on the curb made me feel funny, like we weren't a real family. My lunch sloshed around in my stomach. Becky begged for another story as Dad turned off the engine. We don't have time, honey. Gotta get on the road, gotta get home before dark. His thin brown hair fell across his face when he turned to talk to us in the back seat. He pushed it away with his hand, and I noticed his skin was grayish, color of dust balls under my bed. Mother was quiet. Just one more, please. I can make it short, I pleaded, my voice whiny. No, not this time, he answered in his no-nonsense voice, and I realized I'd lost. I grabbed Becky's hand as she pulled on the door handle. We scooted out together. We walked behind Mother and Dad. Both of us dawdled, dragging our feet, stopping to smell the flowers that lined the sidewalks. I didn't want to leave her, not here, not with all those loonies. She didn't belong. Why didn't anyone see that but me? She was smarter than those other kids and so much prettier. She didn't fool. My stomach tightened. Becky led us to her room where Mother put her clean, folded clothes away in the dresser drawer. While she worked, she and Becky sang silly songs. This time, Mother's singing didn't bother me. I even joined in and did the motions with Becky for I'm a Little Teapot. Becky showed us some of her drawings, told us about her ballet lessons, and demonstrated the positions. Mother finally finished with the clothes, snapped the lid of the empty suitcase shut, and shoved it under Becky's bed. Mother's cheeks looked sullen. Even her red lipstick didn't do much to brighten her face. She spoke in a whisper. That about does it, she said softly as a lullaby. Dad wrapped Becky in his arms, made a shell of himself around her. Give me a big hug. Becky held on long and tight. She'd never been one for hugs and kisses, but she'd learned to allow them, even the really extended touches. Now she made a show of her kisses, stretching her arms open and smacking her lips with a loud, wet noise. After Dad was finished, Mother cupped Becky's small cheeks in her hand. They gazed at each other. When can Becky come home, Mommy? Becky wants to come home. Becky's eyes teared up, and Mother stood speechless. Dad reached to take Becky into his lap. He didn't look at Mother, who seemed unable to move. They're trying to help you, Becky. Help you learn. You work hard and you'll be home soon, I promise. His voice broke, just a little. Mother turned her back to us. Finally, it was my turn to say goodbye. I held Becky, my eyes squeezed together hard. Bye, Jet, she yelled in my ear. I felt Dad's hand on my shoulder, the signal to let her go. By the time I curled myself into a ball in the back seat of the car, my head pounded. Dad backed out of the parking space, and I enrolled myself to wave to Becky one last time. She stood inside the door of the building, the same fat nurse beside her, that hand again on her shoulder. Dad began to drive away, very slowly. Suddenly, Becky broke loose from the nurse, opened the door, and ran after the car. She was all arms and legs flailing in the air. I stared, unable to believe she was following us, unable to tear my eyes from her small body framed by the rear window. Dad, stop the car. She's running after us. Stop. I heard him sucking his breath. Then he looked into the rearview mirror. His throat made a loud sound as he swallowed. Mother hunched her shoulders just a little. She stared ahead. Dad didn't respond. He kept driving the same slow pace as when he started. I watched as the nurse lumbered after Becky, caught her, and bound her in those large arms. He drove on. No one spoke. He didn't utter a word for the whole trip home. We were wrapped in silence, eggshell thin. A sound would have broken us. The next is from an essay titled His Little Sister by Kara Murphy Watkins. I'm reading close to the end. She was to go out and help deliver papers with her brother, and they had an argument, and her brother took off in the snow. So she's talking about this essay in part is how she came to understand her role in relationship to her older brother. She, in a sense, she was a younger sister, but she had to take on a role of an older sister. Uncharacteristically for a boy with autism, by 12, my brother Tim had become socially bold. Without hesitation, he would approach anyone and ask his or her name. Usually his targets had something to do with one of his then current obsessions, utility workers and bald men. Tim would stand beneath the towering utility lines in our neighborhood while he waited for the hard-hatted worker to climb down. Then he'd interview the person. He'd ask, very politely, with some sense of urgency, who the man was, who he worked for, his job title, and how many phones he happened to have in his own home. Mr. Miller, are your telephones dial or push button? They're all dialed so far, Mr. Miller would answer. And what color are they? Let's see, there's the black one, and there's the one kind of tan in the kitchen. And then Tim would conclude things by summing up 2 dial telephones, 1 black, 1 tan, in the Miller household. At home, the topic of phones was always worthy of a pop quiz. Kara, we have how many telephones in our house? He probed, knowing full well the answer. 6, I'd say, tired of this, all dial. And the colors and locations? Sun porch black, kitchen tan, breakfast room brown, mom's room tan, 3rd floor black. And, Tim would prompt, laundry room. Laundry room red. And what about the Nichols' house? But sometimes the questions posed of strangers were a bit more personal. Shiny bald heads were another one of Tim's obsessions. Typically, I'd be going with Tim to the local drugstore when I'd hear this behind me. Excuse me, sir. Tim was speaking to a man whose head was completely bald. And the man had to be completely bald. Going bald, combed over domes, or fringe around the circumference of the head didn't count as bald. What's your name, sir? I would stop and wait for Tim rather than go into the store alone. Most people were polite and indulgent. I'm Jack Baker, and who are you? Tim would respond almost impatiently. Tim Murphy, sir, you have a shiny bald head. Yes, that would be right, Jack Baker would say. Things could go a number of ways at this point. Some people may have realized Tim was not like other kids and react either patronizingly or with hesitation. Most, though, to my relief, would continue along pleasantly, even when Tim would ask, can I pat your head? Oh, God, I'd think, please say yes, please be nice, please. And just then a man would lean over and present his head to Tim. Tim would then giggle and thank him and strode ahead of me with a kind of renewed sense of purpose into the drugstore. He would mumble, Jack Baker, shiny head. You go, Baker, comma, Jack, a balding man. Usually Tim liked to quiz us, his siblings, on who we knew with shiny bald heads. The list was short, always the same, yet the answers were always received by Tim with enthusiasm of the first time. Kara. Yes, Tim. Do you know anyone with a shiny bald head? There's John, my godfather. Mr. Lang, a neighbor. Mr. Hanford with the putting green, another neighbor. Uncle Joe, our father's cigar waving on. What about Mr. Gold? Was Tim's psychologist. Oh yeah, but I don't know him. When I was a baby, Tim had a texture obsession for nylon stockings or pantyhose. This was very short-lived, I think, because of the yelling and screaming that erupted when Tim, 4, ran his hands down the stocking legs of some supermarket shoppers. But Mom would often fondly reminisce over this phase. Shopping with you, an infant, and keeping track of Tim was a nightmare, she told me. It wasn't until I'd hear shriek, shriek, and see streaks of women going past in opposite directions with their shopping carts that I knew Tim had to be nearby. And for years, Tim had an olfactory obsession with new shoes. It became routine for me to present Tim with a box holding my newly purchased shoes as soon as Mom and I walked through the door. He'd open the box, smell the shoes, and hand it back to me. I just watch him and then smell them myself, noting the smell of rubber mixed in with something. Was it cardboard, tissue paper, just glue and chemicals? The smell was interesting. Some of our brother's pleasures did, in fact, make sense to me. I'm going to read from the third essay. We were beautiful once, my autistic American family. And Maureen McDonald is the author. I actually met her when she visited K College to a friend who was teaching in our English department when she was going to the University of Michigan in graduate school. So I knew she had written this essay and we had a conversation in the kitchen. So I knew I could ask her to submit this. She has 2 older brothers with autism. One verbal, another one nonverbal. The poignant aspect of her essay in the book is, I think she was somewhat reluctant. Whenever you're writing about your family, you're unveiling yourself and becoming quite vulnerable, but also making other people vulnerable. But she did it, and not long after the book came out, her brother died. And so this was quite meaningful for her that there was a record. It helped with, I think, with her grief. So that's the backstory. But this comes at the end. She's thinking through spending time with her brothers. Dave is obsessed with Mass. The autistic person's passion for ritual happens to find an affinity in our family's religion. He can't always say the words as quickly as the congregation, but he knows the rhythms exactly and sings along to the murmurs around us. Long prayers are our cue to grasp onto a friend and keep him in the aisle before he rushes toward a friend. When I was in 2nd grade, my mother revamped her wedding veil for my first communion. David got a new plaid shirt and a tie. A suit wouldn't have accommodated his swing. Together we padded up the center aisle to present the gifts. I tried to overlook the whispers, the sympathetic smiles, the flashbulbs that our walk inspired. I still try to cultivate Dave's particular gift, being able to ignore those things around me that don't suit me. And I'm reading a part, I wish I had more time, but she likes to, she will confront people, I think, who don't show her brother respect. My dad took an adult day to reconciliation during a pre-Easter home visit. The church has begun to have communal penance service, with each parishioner heading up and offering his few top sins. Think of fast food drive-ins, and you have the idea. But we've never said the word sin today. This religious education, again, the special class, stopped before the sinning began, before pardoning was needed. This evening, Dave heads up before Dad. Reconciliation is utterly new territory. Dave pauses before the priest, obviously unable to remember the time since his last confession. Instead, he rocks back and forth and stops to announce, "I love Jesus." The priest glances at this normal-looking young man in perpetual motion. Then at my stooped father. He doesn't ask questions, just places his hand on Dave's forehead to begin blessing him. It's not a cute story to me, not something precious. It signals that he got something right, that finally someone in our family has slipped past guilt and penance and can distill catechism in 4 syllables. I left California when I was 21. When I returned, one of my favorite spaces is behind the driver's wheel with one of my brothers beside me. Mark is the calmer passenger. We coach each other through his morning rituals, taking turns asking, "And then what?" We talk about food, Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Anything I say is okay with him, but I keep trying to get his perfect day right. We stop for ice cream. We drive nowhere. We trade sentences back and forth. He helped me remember how good it feels to sit next to a person that you love. A good man who wants nothing more than to grin at you and say yes, yes, over and over again. One evening, Dave and I headed on to the Alameda Expressway. The Clash comes on. Dave begins to laugh and flick his fingertips together. His rocking begins to match the beat of the song, and he begins incredibly to sing "Rock the Cash Flow." It takes me a second, but then my wrist flicks up the volume, and the two of us are screaming along, rocking away, rocking out, both our bodies a blur of volume and giddiness. I roll down the window, spilling our music into the whipping sound of traffic. I want to end this by giving you that open road and the buzz of connection. I finished writing this on an early morning. My feet are bare and my elbows ache. I spent my lifetime trying to say goodbye to possibilities. There's no set way to grieve for the men my brothers might have been, or how my parents might have aged without their disabled sons and a defying daughter, or for me. Alone, I'm left to ask what we might mean to each other. Mark's rituals in physical grace, Dave's greetings of total strangers, in which he never falters or imagines rejections. And there I am, witness to it all, cradling warm coffee mugs, soaking in comfort from all the small spaces that can be found. I lean back to say this: our love is part of the world I live in. I see us all, see our beauty, this grace. I see it still. I'm going to read an essay called Goodness, and there's going to be a short afterword. I feel that I want to end with something different than how this essay ends. And this is a little bit longer. It's about 15 minutes, so it extends a little bit longer than what I've been reading. Its title is Goodness is because when I've heard siblings talk about their experience, when I've heard my daughter talk about experience and witnessing my daughter's experience, there's so much effort to be good, because in some respects they're compensating for what may suddenly happen in the family that makes it chaos. And so there's that burden of being good. And so I wanted to write something that was a blessing, in effect, for Sarah, but for all those siblings, about goodness. And in some respects, I'm putting my stories alongside and stories about my own parents, so that around this idea of goodness, we hear people's goodness in a person's life, in our lives. And I hope there's something healing about that. Beneath an umbrella, I watch Sarah from the bleachers. She takes the ball against her right thigh, lets it drop, and with her right instep strikes a pass to a teammate, and then takes off toward the goal. Her ponytail switching the back of her head, her heels flicking off grass and mud. The ball comes back to her. She traps it with her chest. It falls to her feet. But before she can shoot, the defender bodies up and clears the ball to midfield. She picks herself up from the field and jogs toward the half line. She takes out the band that holds her hair, puts it in her mouth, and quickly performs a ritual of collecting her hair between her hands before tying it up again. Her shorts and jersey begin to darken from the rain and cling to the skin. Mud speckles the knees and thighs. I am watching and writing as I watch, filtering the feel of the cold spring wind and misty rain, converting touch and sight into this endless sprint of images. I am thinking of how much has filled this young life, how much more is to come. I'm wondering what she knows. I'm wondering how much I can tell. She remembers that when she was 12, she went bowling at the Western Michigan University Student Center with Jacob, her friend Mary Kate, and the child care provider Lene. That on their way out, after they had finished bowling, Jacob noticed a small stage in the banquet hall. That he rushed to the stage and interrupted the people rehearsing. That he refused to leave the room. That he gripped the door jamb and did not let go. That a security guard came and helped drag him outside. That during another trip to the library, a security guard had to take him out after he began screaming because a video was not on the shelf. that the man said he would call the police if he did not leave. That Jacob immediately grew quiet, remembering the Curious George story about when Curious George accidentally called in a fire alarm and was taken to jail. That for years Jacob would always talk to the security guard, confusing pronouns into pleading, "He will be good, he will be good," meaning I will. Sarah remembers that one summer, after Jacob tried to hit her, Lene told him he cannot hurt his sister. That another babysitter told her to go downstairs with her friend Bridget, away from his anger, and that from the basement she could hear him throwing things and yelling, "Sarah, help me please, help me please." I can picture her sitting upon the bottom steps, motionless, obedient. I can see how her left forearm and elbow lean against the higher step, how her chest moves in and out, how the muffled thuds and urgent calls rumble through her limbs. I can see a dancer's balance in the way Sarah's thigh and calf tense, as if ready to run across the stage. Her body motionless beneath the cacophony of upstairs footsteps. I can hear what she wants to call out. "It's all right, Jacob, it's okay. It's all right, it's okay." What does it mean to live in the space that can freeze this impulse to spring up the steps, that suspends the desire to heal and to save? Can I offer my own remembering alongside hers? When I was seven, I went to see my dying grandmother, the one from Liverpool who married my American grandfather during the First World War and traveled back with him to his home in Lakeside, Iowa. Less stern than my maternal grandmother, she spoiled us with dollar bills and birthday cards. In her cottage on the east side of Storm Lake, my sisters and I felt like Little Red Riding Hood's siblings, carrying little gifts without the threat of a wolf. Over the backs of chairs, she threw the web of cross-stitched doilies. From a cedar chest, she pulled cardboard images of London and France, of the rose windows in French cathedrals, and slipped them into the stereoscope. We looked through the binocular-like eyepieces, watching the distant places come magically into focus. She told us grim fairy tales, the ones about luck and wit and sacrifice. At the hospital, my father sat in a chair near the bed as my youngest sister and I played the wind-up Christmas angel. My grandmother's thin, empty body frightened us. She called out from the bed the same inviting storyteller's voice, and now with witch's hands. In the funeral home, her casket gaped open in the back near the church entrance. I remember the long walk from the front of the church to my father. I looked up into his face as it broke into weeping. I wanted to be so good. I held his hand and did not cry, even when my own gut cringed at his trembling mouth and strange sobs, even when grief shook off his mask of fatherhood. I wonder how long I stood watching before we walked back to the pew, away from the cedar scent of his mother's best sweater. I wonder how much I allowed him to be a son, to remember the touch of his hand, her hand in his, before I gently tugged his fingers. It was this compassion that knocks like a wolf at the cottage door, this devouring love that accompanies grief and suffering and the unwelcome sacrifices of childhood. After we returned home, I sat in my room waiting, certain of only my yearning for goodness. I could hear the steps and floorboards giving way to the weight of my mother's footsteps. She walks the hallway between the slant of the ceiling and the stairwell. She is young, just 37 in this remembering. When she sits beside me on the bed, her head does not nod with age. The backs of her hands do not show blood-filled veins fraying around her knuckles. She holds me and lets me weep. I make out what the boy, this younger self, cannot remember or did not yet know. That his legs tremble in the sharp angle of afternoon sunlight. That outside the lilac bushes scratch at the winter wind. That against the curb the snow glistens as it melts, then freezes into clusters of ice. That the wet snow slides off the leafless limbs of oak and ash. That this beautiful unburdening explains the stark design of unbending things. And I know what my mother does not say, that she feels goodness in the waves of my chest against hers, that she has no name for the tide of this new compassion. I know what she prays, but may not always believe, the truth that's spread out unwelcoming like flatland in January, that winter barrenness is grace, that frost only goes so deep, that goodness is the traveling seed blown from the stem, a slender shoot that hurries from the split kernel caught in the spring wind. My daughter knows the world through a different remembering. She knows mornings through the endless play of Disney songs, knows all Disney and Pixar movie scripts by heart. Having sat up upon the couch or in the car as Jacob watched Aladdin or Toy Story or 101 Dalmatians or Bugs Life hundreds of times. She knows that meaning sometimes must be caught in the absurd ways that Jacob echoes video phrases and performs the various masks of sadness or anger or surprise in the mirror. She understands that when we return home in the van from soccer games, she can prop a pillow against his shoulder or upon his lap and sleep. She knows that he will wait out her resting until his legs grow numb. She sees that she is one of 3 people who understands the verbs and nouns of his idiosyncratic speech, the secrets encoded in the unique mesh of memory and experience. She carries the weight of this intimate knowing as if she were the last storyteller. She feels as if she must break open at times with the fullness of unspoken expectations. She mothers, provokes, resents, embraces, laments, and laughs. At night from her room, she shuts her door to the loud noise of her brother's laughing alerts. She calls out to him to be quiet, calls down to us to ask him to be quiet. And at times, and sometimes, she laughs at each plentiful outburst, slipping her legs between the sheets and quilt, perhaps surrendering to the comforting rootedness of just how much she can know and still love. When people ask and settle in to listen, she will tell how Jacob disrobes when he goes to the bathroom, tossing his socks, sweatpants, and underwear on the floor, just like the little boy in the children's book, Everyone Poops. She laughs at fearing one time that she would have to play Bert to Jacob's Ernie at Halloween. She accepts without embarrassment that many of her friends have seen him naked, heard him say, "Fire in the hole," and then pass gas. But inevitably, she drifts toward memories that remain vivid in how faces break into anger or sudden remorse or grief. Moments like the time in New York, standing on 5th Avenue. She watched Jacob read the sign on the Disney store. "We are closing at 7:30 this evening. Sorry for the inconvenience." They only knew, she must think, backing toward the curb and surveying the scene as Jacob takes in the meaning. She watches a 20-something woman turn after hearing Jacob shout at the worker behind the glass, "I will hit him." That's a justified statement. "I will hit him." Even on the busy street, space opens up around this drama. In her hand, she holds a bag of newly purchased clothes from H&M. She can only think, how unlucky is that? The Disney store closes at 7:30 on the last night in the city that never sleeps. If they have not reverently sat for an extra few minutes at St. Paul's Cathedral, they may have gotten to the store. Jacob had even lit a candle, no doubt to the gods of Disney and the patron saints of Ariel and Cinderella. She laughs. It is a story, after all, full of dark humor and irony. I have one last story to tell. It is another kind of goodness. This desire to prepare the field together, to turn over winter-packed soil and let the clods of dirt fall unevenly, to let the spade drop and break the sod, mixing together the different layers of our past. It is rough work, this tilling. Listen, I have been playing basketball for years. My young life centered around the next pickup game in a driveway, or as I got older at the local YMCA or University College Athletics Center. Since I was in 3rd grade, when my home team won the state basketball tournament, I have competed hard for a starting position on any team, attended countless summer camps, and endured weeks of preseason conditioning and the fear of throwing up. I dreamed intensely of winning the state basketball title, of playing in Des Moines' veteran auditorium, of seeing my team in the tournament programs, of hearing friends and family talk of staying home to watch the game on television or traveling to the capital. Starting in high school, I rarely missed a week without shooting baskets. For years, I had a heat blister on my small toes, red and calloused. When I was not playing basketball, I was watching it on TV, or imagining all the endless possibilities of final heroics. Here's what happened. We were ranked 5th in the state. We won our way to the sub-state final, the last game before Des Moines. With 15 seconds left, we had a point lead. The other team brought the ball down the court, passed it to their best shooter, who missed badly. As I glanced toward the clock, the last second ticked off. Within the space of that glance and the noise of the buzzer, I tensed my body to jump in celebration, then saw the opposing guard scoop the ball towards the basket with 2 hands. The ball banged. I returned home, emptied out. My mother and father sat at the east end of the living room beneath a circle of lamplight. I collapsed in the chair beneath the west window, put my hands to my face, and began to say how it had all been for nothing. I kept thinking of the inexplicability of that last shot, how it violated the angles of trajectory, how the shooter had no time for intention or aim or form. He was a random body moved to a point of contact, in orbit of limbs, fated for this one outcome. Even now I'm surprised by how deeply I felt the arbitrary finality of the act, how quickly the loss broke the tenor of my voice, how the past seemed to tumble away now, uprooted. My father came to me and knelt at my side. He took my right hand between his palms and held it. His thick fingers creased with paint from his auto body shop warmed my knuckles. I want now to let my hands and arms enfold all that he saw in this child's body. Eyes and lips wet with grief, a face unknowing of the vast stretch of loss, just glimpsing the fissures that open up along things that change. I want to be his hand upon the knee. I want his tenderness when the old fields open up from the next rain. I want the goodness that memory shoots into the limbs. I want the goodness of arms and earth. I want Sarah forever in the embrace of such love when loss overwhelms her. I'm in the bleachers, watching through the lens of memory, cultivating the past, turning the packed soil and creating gaps in the spring sod, the spaces that catch and hold seeds, the ones newly thawed and drifting, urgent to split and take root. The soccer game nears the last minute. In the van at the north end of the field, Mare watches at a distance, running the heat and wipers as Jacob draws. I see the van from the stands and measure the separation between all of us. The need to watch from afar, or to wait for the retelling, or to dig up memories and compose what might have been missed, or simply what might have been. My daughter falls and rises again, gulping air like a replenishing sadness. I watch the quick stride of her legs, the way a foot plants before she pivots, how her shoulder dips into a defender's forearm. I can feel the goodness in all her movement, seen and unseen, in the weariness that comes from the strain through the weight of rain and mud, in the joyful releasing of legs and of love, in the longing for the last bruise to heal before the next love buds. And the afterword. Sarah taught our son how to say, "I love you" to us, and that's, I want to offer that to preface this. When we used to go up and tell Jacob good night and say, "I love you, Jacob," there's nothing but the silence at that moment. So Sarah was constantly overhearing that, so at some point, we didn't realize that until later, she went in and said, "Jacob, when Mom and Dad say, 'I love you,' you need to say, 'I love you' back." So we started noticing that he started to say, "I love you" back. And rituals need not have, the knower need not know what they mean at the time in which they're saying them for meaning something, if that makes any sense. So I'm reading this because I hope when I get to the end that Sarah has taught Jacob how to say "I love you," but I think Jacob is teaching her how to say "I love you" too. Okay. On some weekends, Sarah comes home from college, sleeps until late morning, sleeps away the whole day, straightens her hair, watches seasons of Grey's Anatomy, and if Jacob begins to show signs of frustration or aggression in the transitions of early evening, accepts the wisdom of leaving for a time. It seems she has begun to see that Jacob's obsessions signal what he too laments at times. They are finding their own accommodation for their different ways of knowing, adjustments and understandings that demand the deciphering code of shared memories and the vocabulary of hundreds of movies, videos, and songs. On occasion, Sarah will sing, "We're a duo, and perhaps Jacob will join her, and that's from Lee. Once on the way to visit Sarah in Ann Arbor, after Sarah's knee surgery, Jacob realized that he left printouts of favorite Disney characters and his list of dog friends for Gypsy at home. 2 pages that he'd worked on the day before and planned to have with him during the drive. In his frustration, he said, "I will hit Sarah. I will hit her." And for miles we rode out his effort to deal with his own loss and worried what would happen when we arrived. But when Sarah came out from the dormitory, swinging between her crutches, he spontaneously jumped out of the car saying, "I must help my sister." In the February wind, he put his arms around her shoulders and pressed his nose to her cheek. No one saw this moment but us, but it's possible to retell it now, to see the float of Sarah's hair in Jacob's hands holding the crutch. He is thinking that he is keeping her from falling, and from our angle he is. Before we open the door to take them in, they lean against each other until they find a kind of balance. For a moment we worry that they may stumble, that Sarah might twist her swollen and tender knee, but that is not what happens at all. In the end, we hold the car door open, uncaring of the cold air rushing in and the fear of losing one of Jacob's papers to the wind. "I love you too, Jacob," Sarah finally says, amid her brother's wordless gestures, before letting him bring her